All right, why don't we go ahead and get started? First of all, I'd like to welcome everybody for jumping on. I think that the content of today's discussion is going to be really valuable, and I'm really excited to introduce you to the panelists who are joining us. I am Brandy Keene with Surna Cultivation Technologies, and for those of you who aren't familiar with us, Surna specializes in facility design with special emphasis and special expertise in climate control systems, and so that, of course, has given us a wide range of exposure and expertise related to pretty much every conceivable cultivation practice. We've worked with nearly 900 cultivators since 2006, so quite a lot. Just a couple of housekeeping things. We definitely want your questions, so we're going to go through the conversation, but if you have questions, please just put them in the chat and we'll do our very best to get to them. Direct them to everyone, to organizers and panelists. The panelists aren't actually going to be monitoring the chat, but I will, and I'll try to get to everybody if I can. So without further ado, what I'd love to do is have our panelists introduce themselves, starting with Chad Hansen.
Thanks, Brandy, and thanks for having me. So I'm an architect located in Illinois. I've been an architect since 2012. Is that right? Yeah, 2012. Been practicing before I became licensed. 10 years before that. So I got about 20 years of construction background. I also did some, construction management in between practicing architecture. Started getting involved in the cannabis industry right around the time Illinois became medically legal, which was in 2014. And from there, we just really hit it off with one of the clients and been really focusing on that industry ever since. Since then, I've became licensed in several states around the country and have been doing retail stores is where it started off at, and now we've been doing a little bit more in the cultivation, and that's kind of what we're hoping to talk to you guys about today is cultivation portion of it.
Awesome, I can't wait to hear some of the insights I know you have. Stephen Stewart with Evoqua.
Thank you, Brandy, and thanks again for inviting me. Design and prop systems. I sell them as well. So I work with companies like Surna to help develop solutions for customers on treating their water and wastewater, as well as reuse. So looking forward to this and great conversation.
Yeah, and some significant expense associated with irrigation and that sort of thing. So I'm sure a lot of insight there as well. Last and absolutely not least, Ashley Hubbard with RAIR.
Hey everybody, my name is Ashley Hubbard. I am the Director of Cultivation for a vertically integrated Michigan company called RAIR Cannabis. We grow, process, and sell all of our products at our retail stores as well as wholesale customers. I got into this industry same time you did, Chad, 2014. Started as a trimmer, worked my way up to my current position, and been living in Michigan for the past going on 5 years. Previously, I was a Director of Cultivation in Colorado. And thanks for having me.
Like I said, I'm really excited to have you guys here. I think that the industry is certainly feeling the squeeze, right? We've seen Colorado, we've seen difficulty in Washington, we've seen difficulty in Oregon, and it seems that as these markets mature, the cultivators in particular are the ones that feel the squeeze the most. Related to the wholesale price of a pound, and there are a lot of different factors there. Ashley, can you tell us kind of what you've seen happen in Michigan as that market has kind of gone through its maturation process there?
Yeah, so for example, when I first moved here, the price per pound was about 4,800. Now you see price per pound wholesale market sometimes $500, usually on outdoor, but so the decrease, the rate at which it's decreased has been pretty substantial within, 4 years. Something that's interesting about Michigan is depending on your municipality, I mean, there's essentially unlimited licenses in this state. So there are a lot of cultivators all competing for the same retail customers. So um, that's been a really interesting trend. That's something that I think we see in almost every state that becomes legal, particularly on the adult use side. You really see this boom of product as customers get more experience and want to try and get their feet in the door with different products and everything. But yeah, in the last, I'd say 4 years, we've seen the price dramatically decrease.
And that's pretty much the story of most markets, particularly those, with maybe less barriers to licensing, right? One of the kind of keys to surviving that I've heard from a lot of cultivators is this kind of branding piece, right? And having the right product at the right time for the right client. So how has your kind of selection of SKUs and that sort of thing, how's that evolved, over the course of your of RAIR being in that market?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question. So initially, we wanted to carry and sell just rare products.
Mm.
So in the beginning, we were growing close to 48 strains. As any cultivator knows, that's a big space requirement as far as your mothers go. It's tough to dial 48 strains in a limited space. So we have since taken a step back and learned that customers also want third-party options in stores and in retail. So we have learned to dial back what we think we need to offer as far as strain selection, get really good at a fewer number of strains. So if we do have to bring third-party products in, we know that's a part of our business now, but if we can get really good at a few number of strains, we can really dial that in and get that executed still while bringing third-party vendors in, because that's what we have learned in the process, that multiple different companies is what customers enjoy in their experience when they walk into a provisioning center.
So being hyper focused on the cultivation side on what you can really perfect, and then at the retail side filling in those gaps with what you're not perfecting yourself, but what other people have perfected. Is that
Absolutely. So if there's a cultivator out there that can facilitate a longer flowering time sativa, and you want to make sure you have a sativa on your shelves, allow them to grow that sativa while you can grow what works within your scheduling and your building capabilities. So that was a lesson learned. We wanted to do it all, right? So RARE also categorizes all of our strains by dominant terpene. So in the beginning, we wanted to ensure that we had our full spectrum of terpenes available for people to experience. We still try to carry that spectrum in everything that we grow, but we have allowed other companies to provide us product that we carry in our stores, so we can really dial in what we want to grow well.
Got it. You mentioned your building, and obviously the building is a huge part of your bottom line as it relates to cultivation, and how important it is that your cultivation team has this tool, right? And so one of the questions that we're asked a lot, or one of the things that we focus on a lot, is the development of an efficient floor plan, right? So I want to pivot to Chad a little bit, and Chad, can you speak to how a floor plan can really affect the cost of operations for a cultivator, and then what are the kind of steps to developing a good process workflow and a floor plan that works for that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I try to humble myself a little bit. I think my job is probably the easiest. I'm going to say that. I do believe that it is probably one of the easiest parts of this whole project. People like Ashley and even Stephen, I think, and Surna have a lot more complex role in the project. So, for us, we have a lot of common sense approach to laying out a floor plan. We don't want to try and make the employees have to travel more than they need to throughout the day. So trying to organize the spaces in the most efficient space adjacencies so that your flowering rooms are, obviously you want all your flowering rooms together and all your bedrooms all together. But then you kind of want to have a sequence in a way that, you're going like an assembly line approach where you're not having to run down to, once you take down your flowers, you don't want to take them to your dry room just to have them go all the way across the building back to shipping. So you want to kind of have it going from that methodical process of growing to harvesting to trimming, packaging, or processing, whatever you may have in your building, all the way out to the other end of the building, again, just so you're not transferring them back and forth. So that's kind of one approach. And the other approach is, what I think a lot of people are used to is trying to centralize some of the mechanical systems so that you're not having to, have huge pipes run throughout the entire building. You may be able to maximize or economize on some of your infrastructure by centralizing your mechanical systems. And, as far as how do we start that approach, that really begins with people like Ashley. We worked together on a project before, but it's people like her team who really need to start and tell us this is what we, they start with a wish list and say, this is what we want. This is what we hope to get out of our building. And, we call that a program. And so they just kind of give us a whole list of all of the rooms and spaces that they believe they need to have, probably based off of other matrices that they might have based off, how many pounds of product they want to push out. And they would have formulas to calculate how many square footages you need to get that kind of product. Then we just kind of work through that matrix of all these spaces and then see if they all make sense or if we're missing anything. And then sometimes budget comes into play, right? And then we start saying, hey, what can we live without? Or what can we shrink down? And that's really the approach we try to take, starting with the owner's team and see what their needs are before we ever start putting any kind of plan together, because we could go through a dozen different sketches if we don't start that at the beginning. If we have an idea what they may be looking for, we can maybe we might reduce that down to 6 sketches. It's definitely a process with the whole the whole team, not just an architect sitting in the corner of the room by himself.
Yeah, and I think what I take away from that is you always want, you don't want decision by committee, right? Because you kind of get stuck, right? In a lot of cases, and you'll end up, we've seen plans drag on for months and months and months and months because nobody can make a decision. But conversely, you want to make sure that you have the inputs, right, from all the folks who really know how this building is being used, right? And then I can tell you from personal experience, working with a lot of cultivators who've built multiple facilities, your second building is going to be better than your first one, and your third one is going to be better than your second one, right? And that's just how it goes, right? Because you'll figure out all these things that you're like, wow, we would be so much more efficient if we had done this other thing instead, right? So I would say that it's also very important that you work with folks that have experience, because sometimes things that you might overlook, they may have been able to grab or notice that were overlooked based on their experience, even if they're not, actually working on your team. One of the things that that folks sometimes overlook or don't account for in their designs, apart from mechanical rooms, which are super close to my heart, but is sufficient space in consideration for water treatment in your irrigation spaces, which kind of brings me to Stephen, and understanding that the focus of this is the bottom line, right? And the bottom line is maximizing revenue and minimizing costs. That's what it boils down to. So Stephen, from your perspective as a water treatment expert, how can water in cultivation affect the bottom line of the cultivator? And what are the different ways and the different things that they should be thinking about for their building plan, right, in order to accommodate the most effective water treatment plan?
Yeah, so I think, again, it starts in the planning process, which they've already discussed. And really, for us, it comes from getting a water sample. There's different types of water we need, and water is different everywhere you go. Everybody thinks water is water, but it's H2O, but it is different. And so there's different minerals in the water that have to be treated. And I think as people select a site, they need to be aware of that. They need to be looking at those water samples. They need to be looking at what their water availability is. And also discharge. That's really important right now as we're seeing across the country's laws change. And so what we could put down the drain 10 years ago, we can't put down the drain today. So they need to be well aware of that. And again, looking at the bottom line, if you make a mistake on something like that and have to put in a wastewater treatment system to treat water coming out of your cultivation facility, it's going to be very expensive. And along those same lines, you want to know what your cost per 1,000 gallons is going in and how much water you can get before you build a facility. So all those things are important. Again, we rely on people like Chad and Ashley to let us know, how much water is needed and what kind of water quality do they need in the facility. Where's that water going? Ideally, we want it in the mechanical room. It might be feeding humidification and foggers and other things. It's going to be used in hydroponics. It's going to be used to water the plants. But again, we need to know what those water qualities are going to be, how much water they need, and then we can address that up front. If you don't do that, and you have to go in on the back end and try to fix those things, as Chad said, the space in the mechanical room gets very crowded, and all of a sudden we start cramming, a lot of equipment into a small space. It gets more expensive, and so we want to allow that space to allow enough space to build that system one time and efficiently. But and again, not all water has to be treated. Water around the country, in certain areas of the country, there needs a lot of water treatment, has a lot of minerals. But there's other areas in the country. I'm in Colorado. A lot of the water in Colorado needs very little water treatment before it can be used in the cultivation process. Now, on the backside of that, there might be some water reuse or wastewater that has to be treated. But we want to know all that going in on the front end so we can help design a solution one time, hopefully, and get the correct solution the first time.
Yeah, I was actually on a call earlier today, and we have someone. This has actually come up multiple times. I mean, we've got, you've got the incoming water, right, and the irrigation water, and the cost of the incoming water, and the cost of the treatment associated with that water, which, if you're building for the long term, it is important, right? Water right now isn't as expensive as it likely will be in the near future, right? And then we've also got the potential regulatory component that is almost inevitable associated with actual use and consumption at some point. But an existing regulatory component that a lot of folks overlook right now is what you're doing with all that wastewater. Sometimes it goes right down the drain, and then somebody in Massachusetts just reported paying almost $2 million to haul it off a year, right? Because they can't put it down the drain. And we're seeing something similar happening in a couple of municipalities in California as well. So that is a cost that should be considered. And if you plan for it now, it in the pre-planning stage, it saves you a lot of money, down the road. Ashley, what about you in your building? Kind of pivoting back to the operations side of things. What were things that you really focused on in your building and adjustments that you've made to kind of stay competitive and increase your competitiveness, drop those operating costs, that sort of thing?
Yeah, so I think it's really important for every cultivator to understand really what it takes to grow a gram of cannabis. So we need to understand what our cost of goods are. And for us, and I'm sure most growers, second to your people costs, electricity is probably right there as number two. So
Mm.
we have tried to see what we can do to reduce our second highest cost on our cost of goods, right? We can make the most impact at driving our cost of goods down by taking what costs us the most and reducing it. It's the most impactful. So electricity, for example, we never stop trying to learn. We try to run experiments and continue to learn because that's what I feel is important. But in regards to electricity, we have teamed up with a company called Lift and Grow that built us a custom light lift. And throughout 4 different cycles now, we've been able to lower that light lift, get those plants same level of micromoles, but using less light intensity. So we've been able to, that one row, just by dimming our lights from 100% to 90%, has the capability of saving us $32,000 a year, still by same infrastructure, same everything. But so we try to always push ourselves to make sure that we understand our building and that we're doing what we can to try to reduce those high impact costs to our cost of goods. So that's definitely one example, but um, I will always be an advocate for take data, take data, take data, take data. You can't ever take too much data. Truly, you can never take too much data. But what that allows you to do is you can take a step back and say, okay, this yielded really well or this yielded poorly. What can we look back at the data and learn from that? So always take data. You're never going to be upset that you take data. It's allowed us, quite honestly, to have a huge aha moment yesterday. You'll be grateful that you take data because it allows you to learn what worked well and more importantly, what didn't work well. So you can learn to not repeat what doesn't work and then push forward what you know works well. But that's been an example of something we've tried to experiment with to drive our cost of goods down, and it's promising.
It's really interesting because folks, I think a couple of different things. One, folks are always kind of focused on the big one, right? How do I drop my cost of operation incrementally, by 10%, by 15%, by 20%, and they overlook the 1% or the 2% or how those things can add up. And the way that you find, there are some things that are kind of obvious, right? I can say, look at your operating time, look at when your building is lit and when it's not lit, look when your peak energy use is and correlate that to when your energy use is the cheapest. But if we want to find the onesie twosies, the small adjustments that can be made, that ultimately impact the bottom line, either in the form of a small increase in revenue or a small decrease in operating costs, that data piece is how you do that, right? Because you can walk into a room and everything looks great and we're yielding the same as we always yield and it's very, but without actually, knowing exactly what happened throughout that harvest and then, looking at that graphically or empirically, how do you know if you could make just a small change to, for instance, dropping lights and dimming your LEDs by 10% and reducing your electrical load by 10% off of your lights and getting that, not a decrease in yield, right? You would have never known that if you didn't try it and if you didn't take that data, which is really, really interesting. You've got your ongoing operating costs, and then you have your kind of first costs, right, associated with the actual build of your real estate and how long it takes you to make that money back. Chad, kind of going back to you from a construction standpoint, there's probably a lot that can be done to reduce construction costs and reduce ongoing energy costs associated with that initial design, right?
Yeah.
So do you have some just kind of high level examples, architectural design to reduce your electrical costs, architectural design to reduce your mechanical costs, either whether that's capital or ongoing?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing for me, I'd say, is insulation. Nobody ever wants to get your building sealed up, follow the energy codes. They're put there for a reason, because of, just like Ashley pointed out, years of somebody sitting back there collecting data. And there's, energy codes out there that a lot of people don't like because they think it's going to increase the cost of their building because they have to have a sealed envelope. Do that stuff, do it well and properly, and it's going to reduce your heat load. It's going to reduce the size of your mechanical equipment that you're going to have in there. Now, granted, you're going to have some, heat gains that you're going to have from your lights and things like that you're still going to have to overcome. But I think I'm a huge advocate on insulation and insulating well on a building. It will help. It will help you control your environment, and that's key to this process of growing cannabis, is being able to control the environment that you're growing the product in. So insulation, that's my go-to.
Yeah, you know what, and I can recall very clearly a client who was adamantly opposed to improving their R3 roof insulation because their building was grandfathered in and they didn't have to, and it may have very little effect on the actual cultivation spaces once you take into account the amount of heat that's being produced by lights and all those things. But you've got a lot of ancillary space in there, right? So ultimately what that meant was that the ancillary HVAC systems had to be substantially oversized, and they likely spent more money on the oversized mechanical systems than they would have if they had just insulated their building, right? And that's not even considering the ongoing costs. So, that's something that existing cultivators can really take a look at and call us. We can help you evaluate what the impact would be, of doing a better job insulating your building, for instance. And that's generally not a very expensive thing to do, right? And on the subject of the existing cultivator and what they can do to decrease costs, Stephen, can you speak a little bit to kind of the feasibility of, for instance, retrofitting an existing facility with more effective water treatment or reclamation options? Does that really pencil out for these guys, and what does it look like?
So again, it goes back to that whole sustainability. And I think you already mentioned that, the cost of water isn't really high right now in most locations. I would say Southern California, and there's a few other states that have very high cost of water, but other locations it's not there. Eventually it will be, I think, as we're running out of water in the Southwest, our water is going to get more expensive. And so looking at existing facilities, again, we can go back in and help them design better systems. Again, if they have a water treatment system, hopefully it's something that we can decrease the amount of water that's being rejected or run down the drain or backwash, possibly reusing that water as well. And again, the whole sustainability is, do we have wastewater that we're going to send down the drain anyway? Is there a way to recover that water, maybe remove the nutrients, remove the suspended solids from that water, and reuse it on the front end? And again, that can be expensive. And so right now, the sustainability, it's about going green versus, can you save money and put that money to the bottom line? And so we have to look at that and balance that out. And it really just depends on the water. And it starts, and I mentioned it before, about us doing due diligence up front, getting water samples and understanding what's in the water and what's in the wastewater to be able to recover that water if possible.
What about, and one of the things that I think that our industry does far too little of, and that's condensate recovery. To me, that should be a very simple thing. And for those of you who don't know what I mean, your plants aren't consuming water, right? They're using it as a delivery mechanism. They're transpiring it right back out into the space. And then my HVAC systems are pulling it out, and 99% of the time dumping it right down the drain or outside the building, right? That's distilled water. It needs a little bit of treatment, oxygenation, pH, sterilize, that sort of thing. So there is an investment, but you can all but eliminate your your water bill associated with irrigation, at least drop it by, 50, 60% if you just do this. So what does that look like? Is that a relatively simple thing to incorporate into a facility to kind of, reduce those costs?
Really, again, it depends on the feed water and depends on what they're doing to treat the water. But I would say yes, generally we call that the low hanging fruit, right? That's something that's easy to recover, right? It doesn't take a lot of treatment to take that back and reuse that water. So rather than running it to the drain, you can bring that water back. As you said, you can't ultimately eliminate your water bill. You're always going to have some discharge. And again, just the water molecules themselves, right? You couldn't use them over and over again. Eventually that water would be useless to you. So you have to make up fresh water. But ideally, you could take that water, do some minimal treatment and take it back to the front end. And ideally, if you've got a storage tank, either on your feed water side or your product water side, that water could be added back to that and recovered and reused.
And so then it's just kind of managing the when I need clean RO, when I've got enough recovered or reclaimed, and the controls associated with that, which is something you could help folks with, right?
That's correct. We would look at that and use it like a mass balance, right? We're going to mass balance the water system. So we're going to want to look at what water we can reuse, what that water quality is going to look like, and then where we reuse it. Is it going into the product water? Is it going into the feed water to clean up that feed water a little bit? How do we want to use that water to basically make the system operate more efficiently?
Got it. And Ashley, you guys are in aeroponics, which is incredibly conservative of water. There's so little waste associated with aeroponic systems, but I see so many folks who really pay very little attention to runoff and over irrigation, right? But I always, when I think about that, I think about it's not just the water that's going down the drain. There's also a substantial amount of nutrient that's also going down the drain, right? And that's just dollars. So those kind of really carefully managed irrigation strategies and really thinking about, what you've always done, and is it easy to make minor adjustments to what you've always done with a minimum of investment, and sometimes it is. Being willing to pivot, right, is an important thing as your facility matures, as your operation matures, as your market matures. Ashley, you kind of mentioned the data collection piece and those adjustments. What other kind of adjustments have you made as the market has continued to evolve? You mentioned the lights being dropped down. Is there anything else that you guys have done over the course of the last few years?
So with being vertically integrated, I feel like all levels of our business have learned and adapted and adjusted. But as far as us on the cultivation side, really my building operations manager right now is actually going through a certification class. And in this certification class, you go through all the different levels. How efficient are your lights? How efficient? You give yourself essentially like an Energy Star rating. And just something really jumped out to me that he brought up one day was your building might be effective, right? So it might heat and cool your rooms. It might pull dehumidification, but is it efficient? So for us, we are now trying to tune into becoming as efficient as we can be. So paying close attention to what our root saturation looks like. So do the plants need to be irrigated? So we've learned that we can reduce our irrigation frequency, which helps save us even more water, kind of like you were speaking to as far as condensate. Our condensate water is about 11,000 gallons a week. But we have along the way had to learn a heck of a lot about water quality. Stephen, I wish I knew you then. But yes, you're always going to have to learn your building. Always. You're never gonna fully know it. Something that might be what you think is functioning isn't functioning. So really learning to pivot, I think that really goes back to, we've reduced how many SKUs we offer. So in the beginning, we offered all of our prepackaged flour in variable sizes. Now it seems like the market really is curious about bulk flour now because there's so much in the state. Everybody's just kind of doing larger volume deals. We see the same thing on for our wholesale customers. Everybody's really curious about, or everybody is looking more for bulk versus pre-packed. So we've had to learn how to pivot. We don't offer certain SKUs that we used to offer. But I think it's just you really do have to be flexible in everything you do, because you're always going to have to continue to be learning. So for example, we have a flower room that recently has out yielded the other rooms by 30 pounds. And so we were scratching our heads trying to figure out, okay, well, what is it about this room? What is different? You know, these same genetics are going into other rooms, but come to find out, yesterday we figured it out. We had a fan motor not working, which was actually allowing us to hold higher humidity in the rooms at night. And that led us to learn that maybe we need to push more humidity at night for our plant's sake. So it's really important that you're constantly listening and paying attention to how your building's operating, because sometimes beautiful mistakes happen and you learn through the course of what works and what doesn't work. But yeah, I mean, learning to pivot, you're gonna hold genetics that people are no longer interested in. So pivot quicker on your strain selections. You know, we've held some of our strains ideally longer than what the market's interested in. And so we are learning that we need to offer new genetics more frequently. So we've had to take a step back and almost redesign how our building's thinking about how we want to set up our strains, our nursery rooms, all of that. So you might be operating for a couple years, but it does take, it's very beneficial to just take a step back, look at everything big picture. Okay, what are our goals? And kind of sometimes taking that step back and just saying, you know, what is our mission? What are we trying to accomplish? Sometimes that allows you to not get so nitty gritty in the details, but take a larger perspective and say, are we trying to focus on what's the most important things for us to focus on?
Okay, so 30 pounds is a BFD. And but the ability to identify how and why boiled down to data collection and also to understanding what was happening in your building, right?
Definitely.
And so that's a really that fascinates me, because I think that we can all take a huge lesson from that, right? You know, one of the things that that is not at all sexy about cultivation facilities, and that I think is overlooked so frequently, is the maintenance piece on these systems, right? In your case, with a fan motor down and nobody realized it, that was what we call it, a beautiful mistake, right? But I think that sometimes folks really overlook the cost of maintenance on the facility when they're doing those initial pro formas, and B, the positive impact of correct and routine maintenance on all your systems, right? Everybody focuses on, let's build the facility, let's get all the growers in place, let's get the trimmers, the processors, all of these things, and then, oh, I just built a spaceship and there's no astronauts on staff who know how to, like, you know, that's a terrible analogy, but but there's nobody who knows how to take care of this building now, right? Who's my expert in all of these kind of advanced systems that I may have put in place? And it's not usually your cultivation team who should be responsible for your building maintenance, right? Do you guys actually have a specific maintenance team in place, and do you have a SOPs and all of those things for what they do every day?
We do. Initially, that was what I did, as well as cultivated. So I became very in tune with the building, luckily. But we saw the value, and there's so much, especially with aeroponics, especially with a building like ours, where there are so many mechanical parts and trying to ensure everything's dialed in. We absolutely identified that we need a building operations team. So it used to be just one person, and that team has since grown to 4 people. But what they have been able to allow us to do is focus on cultivating. Let them work on the equipment do the maintenance so we can ensure that it's done properly and it's not, you know, somebody trying to be helpful and maybe puts the wrong part on or something like that. So we have really enhanced that department, I would say, in the last year and a half. So
Mhm.
probably the first year and a half, we were trying to tackle that ourselves, but yeah, it's so beneficial to have a team that is their focus, and very much like, you know, we want to get really good at a few things.
Mhm.
We've learned that our departments work best if they can focus on their few things and allow all the other departments to do the same. So
Yeah.
yeah, we've got a 4 full-time maintenance building operations team, which keep us all sane.
Yeah. And what, your facility is in the 30,000 square foot range? Is that right?
Yeah, so we have about 34,000 square feet.
So the maintenance piece, guys, is multifaceted, right? Like I said, it's so often overlooked, but to Ashley's point, it frees up your cultivation team to be good at cultivation, right? If someone has to choose between a timely prune or an emergency service situation, well, your emergency service situation is going to take precedence, and your cultivation operations are going to suffer, right, as a result of that. The other piece, and the part that's a little bit less obvious, is the actual efficiency of the systems when they're properly maintained. And I'll point to your HVAC systems, for instance. It can be really insidious. You may not even notice that the systems are working less efficiently, because all it means is that they've, you know, the first kind of canary in the coal mine is that they just have to work a little harder to do their job. Well, that means more energy use. And then, you know, eventually the lack of maintenance will lead to premature failure in emergency services and that sort of thing. So, you know, if I pay X dollars a month to make sure it's properly maintained versus having to pay a huge chunk of money to replace it 5 years before it needed to be replaced, well, that maintenance cost is actually less expensive than that replacement cost overall. And not to mention overtime rates in emergencies, right? I don't know if you guys have ever gotten a overtime quote from an HVAC guy, but most of them are not cheap, right? So I would highly encourage you to pay very close attention in your existing facilities to making sure that all of your equipment is properly maintained. And if you're planning a new facility and you're doing your cost, you know, you're identifying what your salaries need to be and who you need to have on your team, make sure you allot or account for maintenance staff and folks who really know that building. Courtney is going to give you guys a poll question here. I'd love to see your answers. We just kind of want to know what everybody's roles are in the industry, and then while she's doing that, we are going to get to a couple of questions that we saw. One that came through on the chat. And Chad, I saw that you answered it, but I'm not sure it went out to the whole audience. Is related to insulation. So going back to your the insulation conversation, and that is, you know, if someone's doing code required minimums, which I think in this example was an R13 on the walls and an R19 on the roof, would you also recommend insulating between rooms, interior walls in a facility? And at what point would that be advisable?
Yeah, so sorry, I think I'm starting to catch a cold now. You know, the response to that is really what you're trying to achieve. You know, if each code-wise, to answer you strictly code-wise, you wouldn't be required to, no. But functionality-wise, you know, you might want to consider it if you're trying to have different climate controls, and especially if there's a big swing between them, like if you're doing a cure room and you're dropping that temperature down and it's adjacent to a bedroom, yeah, absolutely, you want to condition that wall cavity. If you don't, you're gonna be wasting energy. You're not gonna be able to control humidity. You might even get condensation inside there that you don't want.
Gotcha. So basically, if we've got very disparate ranges of climate in a space, we're going to want to add some insulation between there. But if a room is next door to another room that's, you know, basically the same temperature and humidity or the same rough usage, then there's probably not a reason to do that.
Yeah, For the most part, I'd say that's true, yes.
Yeah. And then generally you see higher insulation requirements for roofs than for walls, and that's just because of solar load, right? Primarily.
Yeah, that's, it's a year and a half,
Exterior.
Yes, so
Yeah.
and, you have insulation values on your slabs too, if you're doing new construction. Most retrofits won't have that, but that's another area to look at.
It is interesting, isn't it, how dramatically different some of the building codes are from state to state and location to location, right? And everything from slab construction through insulation values through coastal areas versus earthquake prone areas, right? And those are all things that that your construction professionals and your design professionals have to know, right? That's my job to know where you are and what those codes are going to be. That's Chad's job to know what the codes are going to be where you're located, in addition to having the cannabis expertise. We had another question come through that I thought was a great question that I want to definitely make sure that we address, and that's related to controls and automation, which we barely touched on during the conversation today. But it is, kind of what kinds of automation are really cost effective, right? Where is it really, really, really going to save you money? And I can tell you from my experience, I would say the one thing that you absolutely positively cannot do without, that may not save you a lot of money from an operational standpoint, but will certainly save you in big chunks, and that is alarming, and automated alarming for your rooms. Making sure when something's going wrong with the climate in a space, so you can address it immediately if you're not on site. That's a quick way to lose an entire crop. Ashley, any other comments there?
Yeah, we've lived that. So for us, our current setup, our grow equipment alerts us through email and text if anything's going on out of range in our grow equipment, but the rest of our building doesn't quite have those same alarms that get sent out. So we're very reliant on people looking, logging in, seeing if anything's out of whack. But we just experienced actually a couple of harvests ago, drop in our system pressure, and one of our dry rooms spiked to 75 degrees for 18 hours, and we didn't know. We just walked into a hot dry room, right? So it compromised half of that harvest. So it is so vital that you give yourself the ability to get alerts sent to you, because the way that I kind of look at it and why it's so critical for us is, we've got 9 rows in a flower room. I get an alarm for, 1 row out of there. That's 11% of my room. But to not get an alarm in a dry room, which is 50% of my room, and the quality in a room, that's super vital that we get that same level of alerts, because I just put it in perspective of, there's so much value in that room. To not be alerted to something being off is something that we're pushing forward, because it is perfect example of why that's so critical.
It is a good one, and that's one that I would absolutely not. It's just like it's a non-discussion, right? The other I would think that would be irrigation, right? Which by the nature of your systems is an automated process, but you'd be shocked at how many folks are still out here, doing some manual watering, to some extent, right? Whether that's hand watering every plant or manually engaging and disengaging irrigation operations. So that's something that's a pretty small investment, in the grand scheme of things, that can save an enormous amount of cost related to labor, related to nutrient costs, related to yields, all of the above. I would say that as a whole, the industry has certainly adopted automated irrigation far more than it did 5 years ago. But that one's a common sense kind of no-brainer.
Absolutely.
In my mind. We had a question come in about Chad, this one's for you. The average cost for a 5,000 square foot building with about a third of it being flowering plants, about 1,700 square feet of cultivation. On a per square foot basis, and I know this is a loaded question, there is a huge range there, right? But just a super ballpark range. What do you see?
Never budget too low. You think it's going to be 300, figure 400. It's really hard too right now with ever since COVID. I'm sure anybody that's been in construction realizes that, or even just been around a little bit, that the prices of just like gas and groceries, construction is no different. Prices are fluctuating so much, and it's even hard for people that are in the industry. We have a whole department of estimating, and even they say it's hard to keep track of the change in cost. But I would say for budgetary purposes, I wouldn't shoot, again, and let me put this disclaimer before I throw a number out there. It really kind of depends on what you're looking for in that number. Is this just the building, or is this including building and sites? Does this include, your equipment? Because there's going to be equipment in there, your lighting racks, your flowering racks, coolers. So it really could be a wide range, but I would probably budget in the neighborhood of 350 a square foot, and that should probably get you, again, a good budgetary number. But once you get into getting a floor plan laid out, come talk to us. We'll get you a better, more accurate number.
Yeah, well, and that's that's a good point. One of the things that we always do, your HVAC system is going to be a huge chunk of your budget in a cultivation facility. It's probably your single biggest expense outside of probably the real estate or the building itself, as far as it's, sometimes lighting can maybe exceed it, but it's a big number. And so one of the things that we always do is before we ever get into the mechanical design, is we look at what the options are for the different types of systems that you may want to use in your facility, and then we budget them for you before we ever design it, because we don't want to design something that at the end of the day you go, I can't afford this, I need to go back and redesign it, right? And then the other thing that we can do then, because we do it that way, is we can actually solidify that price, potentially weeks or months before you actually even order the equipment. And the volatility of this market's been wild. I mean, Chad and I worked on a project in Illinois where the construction costs for an identical building, they built it and then they built a second one, and it was, I want to say 40% more expensive, the second version of that same building, just over the cost, over the course of COVID and fluctuating costs. So I am looking at chat to see if we've got any more questions that we didn't get to. I think that we grabbed everything. Oh, sorry, I missed one. Ashley, do you guys do most of your data collection manually? Do you do that through a control system, a combination?
We have a combination. Our grow equipment will do our plants, so that tracks for us. We also actually just went through an entire controls upgrade. Our first company was just not working out, so through Surna's help, actually found a really great company called Grow Remote. Their platform allows us to be able to download our data points. So highly recommend Grow Remote, as well as, I know Surna, you've got your controls platform now. When we were originally building, that wasn't available. So, but as far as data collection, I'm a big believer in Google Sheets. You can share that with everybody. You can see real-time updates, all of that. I love Google Sheets. But we've also used brand new sensors, actually, from a company called Ornavera, that put the sensors at plant level. And actually, through their sensors, we were able to kind of find that beautiful issue with our fan coil. So they'll go through and do real-time tracking. But I would say the majority of our data we will download from Grow Remote, our table software, or from Ornavera, and then I'll put that in a Google Sheets and just see what we can learn. But yeah, Google Sheets should be available to a lot of people. If you have the ability to get real-time data points that you can download, there's a lot of value in being able to just hit download CSV, because you can have somebody go take readings and measurements a couple times a day, but they're really just a snapshot in time. So if you can find a sensor company that gives you that ability to chart it and download that data and in more incremental time frames, that's really where you see the trends and can learn the functionality of that room and that system. So try to find something where you can just download a CSV and then you can plot that data pretty quickly to learn what you can learn.
Yeah, one of the things that that we found to be lacking was really that controls piece and that data collection piece. You know, which is why we have Sentry IQ now, and we actually have in Sentry IQ real-time reporting data, right? Where you can run I mean, there's probably, I don't want to exaggerate, 500 different reports that you could run in that system. I don't know exactly how many, but it's a lot. Okay, no, but you can collect an enormous amount of data. But there are a lot of systems that can do that, and sometimes that might be the right system, sometimes it might not, right? What I would say is just understand very clearly what the reporting capabilities will be of whatever you're looking at, and ask a lot of questions, because there are a lot of them out there that will serve your purposes, right? I've got just a couple more questions. I've got one more I'm going to try to get to because we've literally got a minute and a half. Where was that one in the chat? Let me find it. So 34,000 square foot grow, what is your rough amps? That's a loaded question. It's going to depend very, very heavily on you know, lighting loads and all of those sorts of things. Give us a call at Surna. We do electrical engineering. We can tell you exactly. I would say at least 3,000 amps of 480 volt three phase, something in that neighborhood. Ashley, is that what you guys had?
Yeah, we're 2,500 amp, but usually if our chillers are running, it'll be about 600 amp. If our dry coolers are running in the cold enough weather, it's about 480.
Yeah. So, well, we're out of time, you guys. That went quick. Anybody whose questions we didn't get to, we'll follow up with you guys and make sure that we connect you with folks who can answer those questions. Parting words from you guys, other than thanks so much for joining us.
Let's keep learning.
Yeah, I like it. Thank you all so much, Stephen, Chad, Ashley. It was a real pleasure, and I appreciate you guys' knowledge and willingness to do this so much.
Of course. Thanks, guys. Enjoy your day.
Bye, guys.